Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Bass and Bonsai in the house, not at the range or on the water. So I've got another trigger video. I'm going to try to condense all, not necessarily my on hands or on the finger knowledge, but what I've accumulated over my time in when I was, looking for the best triggers to try out, and so some where I gathered information from, what I know of that is out there, because a trigger video, and you're probably wondering like, why are there so many Glock trigger videos on YouTube? Well, because literally every 6 months to a year, there's probably a new trigger pops up or some kind of technology that changes to where if you're watching a trigger video from even as little as a year ago to definitely like 3 or 4 years ago, there's definitely some new stuff out on the market. So I'm gonna try to condense it down. I know my videos are never short, but I'm trying to keep it as short as I can. But we have to do a trigger pull off, right? We have to definitely go through that, and I want to talk about some of the other YouTubers or places where I'd recommend to go to further your knowledge on triggers to make your decision. If it's your first time Glock owner, Glock clone, want your first trigger, or if you just like bought a used one that came with a certain one, like is it the best, or are there other ones, or there's different kind of what I consider tiers or price ranges for sure, but also like just levels of triggers from companies that make just individual parts for a trigger, complete trigger assemblies basically, and all that kind of stuff, even as far as stuff that goes up into the slide that it technically isn't the trigger, but it's part of, has to do with the pull weight and feel of how the trigger will feel. So anyway, I'm going to try to get into all that, but before we go, let's do a little trigger pull here and see where we're at with these. So we've got Shadow Systems with a Lone Wolf trigger, shoe, and the bar. We've got the chimney Alpha, full what it comes with that goes into a clone. We've got these, which came from eBay, but they're kind of a copy of the Tyrant. And as you can tell, since I have two of those and not two of any of the others, that's probably my favorite. Way up here that you can't even see, we've got a Ranger Proof, but inside it does have a Glock Performance trigger that I switched out the plastic shoe for the Ranger Proof, which is a Vex shoe like from Johnny Glocks. So if you don't know about the Vex shoe, those are very good also. And then since I had the Shadow Systems trigger shoe and I switched out and the trigger bar, we put in this dagger, which is everything else is sort of stock. Now some of the slides have different weight springs on the firing pin spring is different, and then the plunger weight is different. So the and I guess I should talk about components that go into it before we do our little trigger pull. Let me pull out a few pieces here. I want to try to make this as a one video that covers pretty much all the bases on triggers, because there's so much stuff that you can switch out on a trigger that affect how it functions. So as I pull out parts, and you will see there are a lot of parts that actually you can switch out that will affect how your trigger feels, the pull weight of it, and all that kind of stuff. So we will go through that. But first, before we go through all that, I'm going to go in my rankings from the worst, not necessarily feel, but what I consider kind of to do with the money, but also just to do with what I didn't like and don't plan on buying again as we do the pull here. So this is the chimney Alpha. A lot of people talking about it, a lot of people wanting it, and I think a lot of people, once they get it, are let down. And it's nothing to do with the performance of the trigger itself. It's the, as it goes on the reset. So technically it is performance. But so, and I will, these are clear, and I will show you. And yes, I have magazines in them, but they're empty. And if you don't pull your slide all the way back to open, you know, to this point to hold it open, you can actually get your stuff going. So this thing is a very, and as you're going to see right here, although it is my worst as far as for me, as far as the weight, as you're getting ready to see here, is usually 3.5. Like, it is the lightest that I have. And I can't even say that I've tried to get it as light as I can get it, because I know I could get it even lighter. But the problem with it, I didn't go back far enough, is it has a lag on the reset. So, and I'll talk about that more later, but so you have a very good feeling on everything up until it goes for the reset for like rapid shoot, you know, to get another shot off kind of thing. Like at the range, it's not as noticeable, but I just, the Glock Performance trigger is available now, and that would be my pick over the chimney outfit any day. It's cheaper. It's the actual true Glock OEM part. Not necessarily they don't recommend for duty or carry, but I can't say you could do that, but there's things you could do to even make it a little bit more viable for that. But this, for me, it's a no dog. Next one, and not really because I do like it, but in here, and I probably need to work with it, that's another thing. There's sometimes you just slap a trigger in a housing, in a thing, and stuff doesn't go right. But so I guess I should have started with this one. This one is probably as close to a true Glock as you feel as you're going to get if you get a stock Glock type trigger. They typically have some take up, and then you almost get to, and I guess did I show you guys this one's empty. You get to a, I call it a false wall, because it gets fairly stiff, but then there's always more that goes back, and then it breaks. And that's typically what happens on a, but then it's a very short reset, and it pushes your finger back out. I need to do it like this so I don't goof up. So all that, once you get past that first, you know, this, and I could go in there, I haven't done it to this one, I could go in there and take that out. There's tricks you can do, like it's not just a part you get, it's something you have to physically do, make a change, and I'll talk about that here shortly. But that thing, for that first shot, it's almost kind of like, in a sense, it's a double single action. That first shot, even though it's going to be light, it's still going to be just as light as the very first one. That's one good thing about it. The first shot is as light a pull as all the other following ones. It's just that first, you know, taking it up, getting it to the wall, and breaking it. But if you're, so it's actually probably the best trigger you can get for a duty type use, because you have to do a lot of stuff to get it somewhere, and then it'll come through. So if you're, as everybody talks about, nervous, anxious, you get into a situation where you can put your finger on that trigger and you know your finger's like where it needs to be. And then so you're less likely, I guess, to break right through the wall. And then depending on what your weight is pretty much set at. So yeah, this is it's a good filling trigger. It's just out of all of mine, it is the least performance as far as like the take up and the pull and all that kind of stuff. But it's not real heavy. Let's check it. So that one broke at 3.5. Let's see. That may have been too low. So yeah, it's a very light. It's a 3.5. So it's very good. Like, a lot of people would really love that because it feels like everything's like a Glock, but it's a very light break. So if you're, as we go on to another one, so I actually, although it's my least favorite because of that pull up, it is one of the better filling ones. Once you go to the range and start shooting that thing, there's nothing like it feels good. But there's, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Let's just move on. Let's get this trigger pull out of the way. My next one would be this guy. So I'll show you. And this one feels just about as good. This was kind of just to do because I had it. And so you see that I could probably take a little more of that take up out. And there is an adjustment in there. I could do it if I wanted to, but that's really not much. And then it breaks. And you could actually take away some of that reset. But this thing feels, it just feels good. It's hard to explain. There's everything is a solid feel. There's no mush. And there is kind of, yeah, there's some mush right there. There's just a touch if you go real super slow. But the thing about this trigger is you get on it and you just feel like a harder wall. But then it's like it goes through it fairly quick. It's hard to explain. But let's try the pull weight on it. And that's the Lone Wolf. Shoe and bar. And there's still adjustments I could adjust even further if I chose to. Should be 4.5. Wait a minute, I'm pulling wrong. I was pulling down. I lost track of where the weapon was. Let's see. Okay, I got something wrong. Hang on. Did I reset it? Hang on. Let me make sure I got this thing right. That thing didn't want to break. Okay, there it went. Okay, so yeah, 4. And that's the thing about when you're trying to do these things for you guys, like it is getting this to work like your true trigger finger would pull it it's kind of a, so yeah, right about 4.5, which is actually a very good feeling. Like even though that one breaks at 3.5, this one at 4.5, this feels like a more comfortable trigger to shoot as far as just the geometry, where it's how short everything is, how more kind of a, you know, cleanly it does it kind of feel. So that's why it's my next in line over this guy, even though this one has a softer thing. I guess if I have to call it something, it would be like some mush, no mush, and then that long take up feel. But and another thing about triggers, it's all could be a personal preference. Like there may be one of these I totally absolutely love, and you let somebody else shoot it and they're like, oh, that trigger sucks, I hate it. And like, well, I like it. So moving on, my next would be, and this is my favorite, this is probably my best overall performing one, but it takes more money to get there, is why it's not with those two, as you're going to see right here coming up. So we're clear. This is the Ranger Proof Vex shoe. You can get it fairly customizable. You can decide what color you want the trigger safety, the trigger shoe, and you can also decide if you want this to be the same color as what color the shoe itself is, or kind of shaved off where it's that bare aluminum look. There's a better shot of it. And then it's got the Ranger RP right there, and then a little bit of a kind of etching, checkering. And just feel like there's nothing feels wrong about this. So let me just show you. I've got it. I guess you technically could take a little bit up, but not really. So you're just there. Like it is very precise, short, everything. Let's get a pull on it. Let me go. I was almost too far down. I want to cheat. Now this one is maybe not quite as light as what that Chimney Alpha is. Let's see. So just under 4, so almost 3.5. And like I said, you got to so yeah, I don't know if you can tell it starts to go. It's like 3 3/4. It breaks before 4. But the thing I like about it is, so get another shot off. Like as soon as I'm letting off, you guys can see that it instantly is pushing and following my finger, and it does it quick, slow, or whatever, to where, like a lot of people compare them, as I'll show you here shortly. This one, the Chimney Alpha. Now I can take a lot of that out on this thing, but I haven't played with it like I did the other one because I instantly didn't like it. I kept trying to play with the reset, and I couldn't get it where I wanted it, so I just kind of gave up on this trigger. But so this gun here, I want you to watch that. See how that, I'm taking pressure off. That safety is even coming out with me, but then the trigger, it is so slow. Coming back, like you can play with things, but I cannot get it to where I like it. So anyway, that's out of the ones I have, and we're gonna break down some of it and talk about it. So, and I have kind of I've gone through the different ways of doing it. So like here we have the Chimney Alpha, we've got the Glock Performance. I tried it by itself, and then I've added the shoe. Some of these I have just the shoe, and then I had the whole Shadow Systems system, which you can buy just that system. I want to say it's like 90, it's almost $100. So you basically put the full internals out of a Shadow Systems in a PSA Dagger or in a Glock or whatever. So when you start looking for a trigger, you're like, well, you'll hear somebody say, you know, what trigger you guys recommend for the Glock? Well, what do you mean? Do you mean trigger shoe? Do you mean, you know, the complete trigger assembly, which is going to require the shoe, the bar, the trigger housing, the connector, and then there's a spring in there if you don't know, and on just the stock ones, okay? Or do you mean if I want to change out the spring, the plunger spring, even the shape of the plunger can affect a trigger. So there's some companies out there that sell like everything. Like I guess I'm going to name just off the top of my head where you could get that. You know, they basically sell full, complete custom guns, Glocks and stuff. But Agency Arms, Zev, OverWatch, I think maybe sells a complete system. I know they sell a lot of stuff, and that's a highly known one. But then you also have companies like Ghost and some of these that sell just separate parts, and you can piece together, you know, and other places where you can buy just the spring for this. But then what the most, I guess, common thing is, and maybe ends up being some of the most expense you can spend, is in the trigger itself. Now, this last few years, you came out with the Chimney Alpha or the Glock Performance trigger, which totally does away with this spring in here and this cruciform thing that I'll talk about. So those are the only two on that playing field that you can any other company that you're going to get, whether it be a Shadow Systems, the Zev, the Overwatch, or whoever, they're going to take this in some way, shape, or form, change stuff around to make it their own. But the Chimney Alpha, as I'll show you, and the Glock Performance totally changed the game, right? A true game changer to how this stuff works. But then with the Chimney Alpha or with the Glock Performance, you can still go in, change this out, change this other stuff to enhance those triggers. And then you have, like I talked about, the wide gamut of just companies out there that are making the trigger shoes. And you can put a different trigger shoe on pretty much any other stuff that is out there. They not everyone maybe, but some of them are cross compatible. You do have to watch sometimes. You'll get one that this hole here where the trigger goes, and whether it's a set screw on an aluminum one or just a pin that pops through like on these, it may be either tight or a little too wobbly, and you may have to change up something on that. But usually there's a couple I've seen that are a little bit different. So before I go any further, I'm going to talk about these, and let's do a quick trigger pull on these two, because this one, and then we'll go into full-blown, take some of these apart and I'll show you stuff. So this one I just put in. This is my not reliable yet Glock 26 slide on a 19 or 19X style frame with the compensator. Somebody asked me, that's the HC 95 Harrington arms. You can't get it cut like that. I did those cuts myself to match it up. I did all that myself. I need to paint it right or better. So I just put this one in, and yes, it does. This one does. It locks back with nothing's been modified there. I just modified it to where the slide would slide back further, but it still is lacking. I need to either come back just a hair more or just shoot it enough and get it to run reliably, because I can only put 2 rounds in at a time. And so anyway, so I stuck this in, I believe it was yesterday. It feels a little tight, and I haven't figured out what's making it feel tight. Like it feels tighter than it should. And it may be the striker spring, it may be this spring internally in there is what I'm feeling. Maybe it's a heavier one than it should be or something. I don't know. Something feels a little tighter than it should. So you can kind of tell. We'll check it definitely feels like the stiffest of the bunch. We'll double check the pull weight. So you see it jumps out, and it almost jumps out too far. But you can't really take it up much more than that. I could have tweaked it, and I still technically can, just a hair. But so that's working. Got your take up, brakes, reset. So it feels good, just feels stiffer than it should. So I definitely need to change something up a little bit. Let's get a pull weight on it, and then we'll go to the last one, which is the same trigger. It's had the same stuff done, but it has had some of these other springs and stuff I was talking about switched out. So this is going to be a hard pull. 5.5, yeah, 5.5, which is still fine. It's just out of all of mine, whoa, look out. Out of all mine, that is the heaviest. Still feels good, but is the heaviest out of all of them. But I just stuck it in yesterday, haven't tweaked on it. So here's the same thing. And this guy, which is my kind of favorite. If you haven't checked out the videos on these, I do like this one. So this guy, it's tucked up just a hair further than that other one. Hold on. Let me reset this dude. So once these are set, if you can make out, see how that it's tucked back just a hair further. I don't know if you can make out. I could have tucked that one back up just a hair. This dude he's right there. So anyway, this guy, take up, brake, so like it. I'll just show you this thing. So that there, as I talked about, we're talking about the takedown slide release, right? Ghost. It's called the bullet forward slide release. I can get a good grip on this firearm, and it shouldn't. Now I haven't tested it yet, but then yet I can still have my grip there, and I can still reach that, and it's forward out of the way. See how it sticks out? So I think I'm liking that, but let's check this trigger one more time. Yeah, it feels very light. So let's check it. This is my, if you guys can't tell by now, this is definitely my favorite little, because it's just, it's a little good shooting, and it was one of the cheapest builds. Yeah, so just under 4 pounds. So it's a little heavier than this guy. by a little bit. Now I have added a few different things up here, but it's as I'll show you here. Let's just start talking and taking them down now. Take the magazine out. This is, as you can see, it's got all stock parts on the PSA dagger other than the trigger shoe. Now I can't remember, I think I may have added the 6-pound trigger spring there, and that's another thing I didn't get into on those. I talked about a little bit. You can get here you want to go with a stiffer spring if you're wanting to lighten your trigger pull. So this actually helps pull the trigger back. Let me show you. So let me put this back together. So if you ever get this far apart, I'll show you that little trick. If you ever have this, and I've talked about another video, if you're ever tinkering with your trigger and you're like, what happened? Something totally changed and it's funky, is you probably have that spring off to the side and it'll give it a drag. So double check that. I need to make sure that other trigger, I didn't do that on it, but it doesn't feel quite that bad. So I know I shouldn't be showing you how to do some of this stuff, but make sure I didn't get that. I did it. See how I did that? I did it and wasn't even trying to. So when these are in there, you should be able to, you know, holding this, like pushing it, pressure like this up against there, that should slide. So that spring is actually helping you pull the trigger. So you go stiffer there, you know, if I think stock may be 5 pounds or whatever, but you get 6 pounds. I don't know if they make anything over that. They basically just add a pound to that, and it helps take away, you know, maybe not a full pound, but some pressure. And these are all geared towards range shooting. I don't recommend, if you, the shadow systems and stock Glock stuff, is what I recommend, and then polishing them up if you got like a carrier duty. Any other than that, you're taking your own risk if you start modifying this stuff. But so anyway, that spring, go bigger, heavier. All the other ones you'll want to go a little bit lighter. Go, you know, whatever your gun come with stock, and then go down like a half pound, a pound, whatever they, you know, options are. So I think I may have switched that to the 6 pound, and then this may have, what I found was that you can get these, I think the lowest I've seen is 4. They sell like a kit too on eBay where you can get a lot of this stuff. I think Ghost, OverWatch, there's several companies that make just the little spring kits, but a lot of them you can get, all 3 of them I showed you. This, the one that's in here, where'd it go? You can get, it's, you know, just a trigger spring kit or whatever, but you can get that one in there, this one, and this one, all geared towards making your trigger pull lighter. In my opinion, the one thing that I noticed instantly that makes the trigger feel better to me is to go with what they call the lightened plunger spring, and then make sure your plunger isn't a very cheap one that is kind of like this one. On the Gen 3 and 4, before they went to the 5, they changed this. If it's too, see how that has like sharp edges, and it's almost like it's, and I've seen some of them almost look completely squared off. That, in my mind, is not a good one. And if you have that shape with this stock pull, like no matter what else you do, you a lot of times you'll get just a trigger that feels off. So I guess if I had to recommend, and I don't even know what weight these come in, they just call them lightened, but get the lightened plunger spring, a 6 pound spring in here, and then the probably a 5, because I want to say this is a 6 pound stock. I can't remember for sure, but I know they go 4, 4.5, and 5. And I think if you buy that kit and just put the 5 in, with those other 2, it just makes it feel so much better, and you'll get into that like 3.5 or 4. Now, if you're wanting to range only, go as light as possible, you can put the 4 in. The problem with the 4 is just like why I don't like this trigger. If you don't care about your reset feeling a little sluggish, or you know you can't tell, when I put the 4 pound, I want to say I tried it in a few different firearms, and what I was having happen was that what had happened was, we'll use this one. You know, like it was, everything was lighter, and you could possibly have. You're more likely, the minute you go lighter with these, you're more likely to get light primer strikes. So I only go just a little bit lighter than what stock is, and so far I have not had an issue doing that. I don't think I've fired any of my firearms worth of 4-pound in it, because when I put it in, you hear that reset and kind of see how fast it is. Like when I went with the 4 and I tried a few different ones, I could feel that. It didn't get to feeling as bad as this on the reset, the chimney alpha, but I could feel it luggishly, like not wanting to push back, because that's what kind of happens as you're you know, that thing, this is up in the slide. The slide goes back, and when it comes back forward, it is pulling this back up, or, you know, putting pressure. So it's basically loads this spring back up. So when you go to let off, and, you know, let it come back, well, if you've added a 6-pound here, and then you put a 4-pound up here, that difference just makes this feel sluggish to me. So in my opinion, for a reliability deal, go as heavy here as you can to let something help you. You know, it's helping your trigger finger work this thing. Then stay, you know, on this end. This is what is going to assure that when that thing hits your bullet, there's not a light primer. It hits with as much force as needed every time, even if one's, like, say it's got a funky primer, but whatever. So in theory, you could go like with the Glock Performance. Let me take this guy apart. What, in my mind, you can do, hang on. I went too far back. Oh my God, I did it again. Hang on, I'm getting anxious. So, and then this one, yeah, no, wait, this guy, I think this one has everything stock. So there's your plunger, and it's hard to tell by feel. If you mess with enough of them, you're around enough of them, you can kind of tell. So yeah, this one has a lightened one, and this one definitely doesn't, because this is all the internals on the dagger are stock. So the spring in here for your striker, the plunger is stock, and then that thing was still able to get real close to this chimney alpha, which I believe some of these are changed just because that slide was on something else different at one time. So with this, let me get the magazine out of the way so it's not extra stuff you guys are looking at. It's got a spring in there that sort of helps you with that. And I don't know if they're starting to make different springs to help even more or do whatever, but in my opinion, you can get this Glock Performance trigger, which, let me take apart this one just so I can talk about it at once. So if you remember me talking about, let me check this guy. I think that may be stock there, but I think this has been lightened. I think I lightened it to like a 5, whatever the next step down from stock is. So you have what I talked about earlier is what changes the game. You've got a Glock Performance here and the chimney alpha. They came out first, then Glock was like right there, and they changed some of how they do it. So if you remember me talking about that stock spring in there and see the cruciform, this is a whole different way that it works. This cruciform, the trigger bar, it's all connected to up here, your trigger, right? So when this starts coming back and loading up, and you let off here, like this is physically the part that is moving due to that. So it requires you, when you get that pull and you have this loaded on, you will feel like a pull. Like if you guys remember me talking about, and you saw this one, that's a setup it's got in it with hardly no changes from stock. You remember that first initial pull as we're, it's up here and we're pulling it back. Well, what we're doing is we're loading that for its final little bit. There's just a little bit more it needs to go. Then this right here forces it down, which drops it off there and it fires. So then once you reset, you just like, this pops up over this. That's your reset. This catches your slide. There's a thing in there. Pops that up. Forces it to, pops it up like that. And then when you let off, this this pressure is all that you have is pulling this forward, because this spring in here is actually still helping hold it back. So you got these two working against each other. So if you go, that's why I talked about, if you go too light up there and you've got a 6 pound here, it can feel weird. But so what that does, when that pulls it, it resets it. So all that works good. It's worked good for years. Well, they completely changed that with these two. And the reason the Chimney Alpha sucks is because the way they compensated, since these two where that catches is not a part of the bar on either one of these setups. There's back here, not connected to this bar. There's back here, not connected to that bar. So when that does whatever it's doing, this here, although depending on how heavy you go, it does affect it somewhat, because it has how much force is pushing against these two pieces. If you're, heavy, it's going to take a little more force to drop for those to slide apart. But as far as the trigger resetting and all that, has nothing to do, that this is taken out of the equation. So in order to get a good reset, what Glock did, now let's talk about Chimney. They were first to do it. There's a spring up there that goes in, and they've actually remodified it, and they've changed it up to a stiffer spring. If you don't like the way the first one, it comes with a red one and a regular metal colored one. The red one's the stiffest. It's one I have in there. I didn't even think about liking the other one, but it's, in my opinion, still too soft. So that's why with these triggers, they push back, because you don't have to have that part up and almost loaded to still have pressure. That's why these kind of still have that, trigger feel. See them working? So when that's up there, I'll try to show you this way. When you pull it, see how it's dropping that down? So it works the same way, just like that, as where it's mounted. So when you come up with these and there's a reset, the slide pops back, it resets it. So from right here until you hear that pop, that's reset. And that spring right up here, that you can see at the bottom of it there, hooked into the trigger, that's what's pulling it back up. Well, I don't know if, I honestly couldn't tell you if Glock was even paying attention what Chimney was doing, or they did and then copied it and said, oh, their trigger sucks on the reset, so how do we fix that? Well, they fixed it with the little spring in here. Inside here, that little spring is pushing, so when you pull this trigger, it's loading up that spring. The bar is pushing this down. That's what makes it drop. But that spring is pushing back against that. So with that, and I guess it's maybe because it's pushing from back here, is what's letting it get its just a night and day difference on how these two, once they're fired. So this one, I guess let me show you if I can, since I showed you on the other one. Let me show you this way. See how far that is coming back to, but it just, like, it's a night and day difference how much pressure I feel pushing back on my finger after I pull that, and then it resets. Then it would be breaking again. That would pop up after the slide came back and pushed it over to let it pop up, and boom, it all happens in a series. And then you have this the whole time pushing your plunger out of the way to let the striker get by, another one of the safeties. So in here, how well it's shaped, polished, and all that could have to do with it. And I'll be honest, this thing's getting light pulls and working very good. And I've not even, as you can tell, I've not tried to polish up here, like, or any of This thing could be crazy like light, but I feel where how tight everything is already, it's like close to right there. Now maybe as my skills go up, I may not my skills on be able to do it. I could do it, but as my shooting skills go up, and I'm like, oh man, I wish that trigger was just a little bit softer. Maybe there's like still room to grow with that. Same thing with this one, other than on that reset. But it's just something I don't even know. I thought at one time maybe if I drilled a little bit into there, seriously, this went through my mind. I could drill on these daggers anyway. I could drill this out to accept a spring like this, to where when I pulled this trigger, it would collapse this spring, and then so for that little bit of just a little bit of time needed for that to pop off, kind of like a little booster to shoot that out if I wanted to use that. And honestly, if this was the only trigger available, if the Glock performance trigger didn't exist, I would probably go down that rabbit hole of tinkering with this to get it resetting better. But here's the thing. On sale 100, 140 normally or whatever. I know it does come with aluminum shoe, but you can go out, in my opinion anyway, they're roughly around 79, 80 bucks. You can get the Glock performance one. Stock shoe works fine, or you could, you know, whatever, you get one of these $40 shoes. I think there's as cheap as $25 to $30, $4 on eBay, just an aluminum shoe, put on the Glock performance one for a range, you know, and then get out and adjust it. That's why I was like, yeah, I'm just going to stop there. I'm not going to mess with that thing. I maybe could polish a few more things up, but everything, it's a very light trigger, feels good. It's just that reset. And honestly, that would fix it. I don't know how you would do that other than just drill a hole, you know, just to where this basically almost screwed in with such a tight fit. You had to force it in a little ways to where when you pulled that trigger, you know, and then you adjust to whatever you need accordingly. The problem is if you do that, I mean, you could get this probably even lighter than 3 pound, 3.5. But the minute you do that, when you get to that final stage and it's dropping, it's going to start applying pressure to that you can feel, so it may increase your trigger pull up to, you know, 4, or if it's 3, 3.25 or something. But I just, that's a lot of thinking and work and monkeying around to where this one, they already did it. Glock already did it. Which one's more reliable? They haven't been out. Neither one's been out long enough to know if one's going to outlast the other. If this got some kind of internal little part that could snap. I will tell you this: no matter which one of these you think's more reliable, it's not going to be as reliable, I don't think, as the stock. This is a simpler design that if you tweak on it right, definitely works. So I'm going to end this video because it's getting crazy long, and I totally spaced off and we didn't even talk about it. As I end the video, we're going to talk about, I'm going to take this off. It's a simple maintenance is what this is. The connector is also a way to change how the break takes place. Is it and I'm going to try to make it real simple for you. So and it's kind of a preference also. You got this here coming straight at. So just consider this. Don't even look at this. These can also be manipulated and jacked around with. But you basically got this coming straight back. And if you see where it catches, taking this out of play, just going off this, you basically have a lot of different connectors that change. Right? So this way, you have a long, slow dropping down. It's going to feel, the triggers are going to be working back farther towards the very back of the firearm. Like I talked about, I don't really like, and that's probably what's going on. That's probably what's wrong with this one. It's got a stock connector that's a little jinky, and if I upgraded the connector, it would happen further out. So the reset may be a little bit different, but it would happen faster. So anyway, when you're like this, it's taking longer. Let me just use this. Okay, so here is the connector, and here is the thing. So when it's like this, and let's say we need to get to here, right? And when you're going that far, you see how far everything's traveling? And actually, here's not the point. Let's say it has to drop down. So this far down is the point. So when you have the bars like this, but when you have a bar like this, it goes quicker, if that makes sense. So you drop just like whoop, and it drops faster, breaks quicker. Necessarily not smoother. That's all. It usually has something else to do. This just has these two come into play on just how fast that break process, takes place. So if you're going up, like, imagine if you were so steep that it literally was almost, it came short of just stopping it and wouldn't let it break, but then it would just break. That would probably be the, sharpest break you'd get, but that's going to take more. It's going to be a harder pull to get it to drop. So as you play with that, it doesn't take as much of a pull, but it takes a lot further to get there. So there's where, and they've kind of found the sweet spots on the 3.5, the dot connector, the this, the that. There's so many of them out there, so many different companies making those. So the Ghost, I want to say, and I don't hold me to this, I could have swore I heard somebody on one of the PSA forums talking about they think it's pretty much a 3.5 connector in the PSAs. I'm not 100% sure, but I know if the 3.5 Ghost connector I bought, it did look the same as the one in my Shadow Systems. I think maybe they're the same too. But I like the way that one felt for me anyway, and these feel fine, that all of them I've had so far. Except for that one, like I talked about, that I have in my 19X. This one feels a little weird. See how far back that breaks? And I know with the stock, everything in these stock, it's almost like that takes place too soon. So maybe they do need a 3.5 connector from Ghost. But those you can get also kits with the connector, like a full kind of kit without going into bars and shoes and that kind of stuff. If just look on eBay, Glock 19 trigger, Glock trigger kit, Glock trigger shoe, and you'll see everything if you don't buy it there. But Primary Arms, eBay, Primary Arms, I want to say, Optics Planet. There's several places. You can go straight to like Agency Arms, Overwatch Precision, their websites that sell the stuff. Glock Performance Stores, how can you forget those? Has everything to look. They actually, I've never even tried it. I don't even know which way they're going with it. But Glock Performance Store, I believe, makes the Pyramid trigger kit, whichever one that is. So hopefully I covered everything in triggers. If you guys have any questions after this video, and also if you're watching this video, look at the timestamp on it. If it's like over 6 months to a year old, go look and see what's new out since then, because there could be something that blows all these away. But in my opinion, for like what I plan on doing in the future anyway, is probably going with just these little kits that you can buy, the springs and maybe the 3.5 connector, and then just putting a trigger like this. I like this one. It's a Tyrant Designs, but this is just a cheap one off eBay. It's just a gold Glock trigger. I don't even think it has a name, but the Tyrant Designs is who this one is definitely shaped just like. And then, like I talked about, I would recommend going to other YouTubers that I recommend to watch, and there's probably more than this, but Johnny Glocks would be my first and foremost. Just, I'm not saying go buy Johnny Glocks triggers, but the Vex shoe is probably one of the best, if not the best, just for how precise you can work it. The tactical toolbox, that guy goes through a lot of it, but he hasn't really put together a true Glock trigger video about comparing a lot of them in a year or two, couple years, so his information may be out there a little bit outdated. But he definitely likes the, I remember in his last video I watched was that, and I don't have one, I need to get one, the Apex trigger and Overwatch Precision, I think are his two favorites. The Apex just in the feel, and it's probably the closest I have to it would be one of these because it's wider. So the Apex, one thing it's known for is the way the shape up here, which isn't quite like this one. but it's also a wider one. So when it breaks, there's almost no back travel, and then the reset. It's just like a thunk, and that's where I like this one. And then lastly, you can also find some of these ones that have, like I want to say for sure, Apex and Overwatch make aluminum shoes, right? And they're pretty expensive, but then they also make like a polymer, same type, just made out of polymer, which are like 30 to 50 bucks instead of like 100 or whatever they are. So there's tons of them out there. Hopefully this helps somewhat. If you have any questions, drop them below. I guess if I had to spend $10 or less, I would figure out how to buy just one of those. The light and plunger is probably one of those things that's amazing how it feels. Probably the 6-pound deal here. Leave this stock until that's your last choice to go lighter here. Like, oh, I just need a lighter trigger. That would be my last option, because that could affect. It's not going to affect the reliability on the gun per se, but the heavier this is, the more of a chance, if you got a funky primer, cheap ammo, and you need the hardest hitting thing, it's a good idea to have that stock. Now, you could also go crazy if you wanted to. Go everything all out, as light, as polished, as whatever, and then actually up this. I think they even make a pound heavier to go to, like, to ensure that that's you're as hard hitting as you can, but you better watch out which one of these you have. You're going to be putting more stress on that, but you could also go that route if you wanted to carry one for concealed carry. You wanted to put, I'm not telling you to do this, but say you wanted to get that one, Glock Performance trigger, put whatever kind of shoe, and then you realize everything's short and crisp and sweet, and you've got a 3-pound pull, and you're like, oh my God, I wish, like, that's too light for what I want, you know what I mean? Then this would be the first place to go. Just go to a heavier thing here. Next, if you're wanting to like make it safer, is just figure out how to give yourself a little more take up, to where it's not so far on. To where this thing though, it just came. That's the way it sets. With that, I added that, so it would set out further. And the Glock Performance trigger is closer. The break feels different from a Glock, but the Glock Performance trigger itself isn't too far off. But see, I took up that. I guess I didn't even talk about that. Oh my God, I'm trying to keep this video under an hour. So Johnny Glocks video, he talks, and there's several other guys that'll tell you. There's different ways to come in here on this trigger housing, add little set screws and stuff to adjust the take up, and I've even got some of these, and some of these even comes in the trigger. This one's a perfect example. There's a set screw going up and down that you can adjust the take up and the whatever. So be aware of all that, and the ones that are adjustable. As I get out of here, I will tell you, don't monkey around. You want to make sure that stays on what they call the shelf. So as long as that's up there, as you see where this thing's riding up here, and there's a shelf on both sides, there's no way that it can drop down with that trigger there. This trigger, there's no way it can go any further back unless you stick something in there, do away with that safety, and start to pull it. And then with this being where it is, this isn't going to move. So then you have up in here that, if for whatever reason, let's just say that this, and then I'm out of here for sure. Let's just say you got this is in ready to fire, and for whatever reason, this is what's in here. Okay, so this is loaded back and it's ready to fire, and for whatever reason this failed. Say this either chipped off, this part just completely broke off. Let's say it's a MIM part that's junk, and it snaps and that sends this, right? The spring's going to send it, which it will if that were to break. I'm not saying it will. I don't know how many has ever broke over the years, but if that snapped and this goes, that won't let it. It'll just hit that before this goes through the hole to hit your bullet. That's your last line of everything else in the gun malfunctions, breaks, sends this thing flying. That will keep that from going on. So there's also some 1911 style guns, other types of guns that have that in it also, and there's a lot of guns that don't have that kind of thing. But in my mind, a stock Glock, most of these stock clones, a PSA Dagger, other than I don't like this trigger, if it were to snag on something, it's basically not a trigger safety. It's just a drop safety. It's not a true something snagging. But it actually is fine. It does get the job done. They're pretty much the safest, loaded firearm to carry, in my opinion, because there's just so much that built into them to keep them safe. Like this guy right here, it's pretty much as stock as what any of them I have, And so it would take, like you can see, I'm pulling in from the side. It's not going to go. I'm pushing on the trigger, but I'm not hitting it all the way. It takes something in there to get it to bypass. And it takes a lot of pull, so you get antsy or whatever. It takes a lot to get that thing to fire. But if you aren't meaning to fire, there's so many things built in to keep this thing from just going off, right? Drop safe, that kind of thing. All right, I'm out of here. Wow. Thanks for watching, guys. Any questions? Like I said, I'm sure I left out some. There's so much that you could sit and talk about for days on when it comes to a Glock trigger and what's available for them. So get out of here. I got to put all these things back together.